Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at a trilogy of albums that featured iconic guitarist Pat Metheny as a member of the Gary Burton Quintet / Quartet from 1974 to 1977. So as we all know, Gary Burton is one of the greatest, most celebrated, decorated, iconic and respected musicians of all time, and was one of the pioneers for the vibraphone instruments back in the 1960s, and is one of the most important figures in the history of music. And throughout his legendary career as a band leader, Gary Burton has featured a number of different guitarists in his band that read like a who's who of guitar players, from Larry Coryell to Mick Goodrick to John Scofield to Wolfgang Muthspiel to Kurt Rosenwinkel to Julian Lage, and of course the biggest name to ever come out of Gary Burton's band, the one and only Pat Metheny. Now, Pat Metheny, as we all know, is someone who needs no introduction. He is one of the greatest guitar players of all time and was 19 years old when he joined Gary Burton's band and was a member of Gary Burton's band for a total of 3 years, from 1974 to 1977. And Pat Metheny has gone on record many times over the years and said that joining Gary Burton's band was a dream come true for him. For him, it was like the equivalent of joining the Beatles, like replacing George Harrison. That's how much it meant to Pat Metheny as a young musician, and he has always considered the Gary Burton band to be not only his favourite band, but also a pioneer in helping to kickstart the genre we know as jazz rock, later dubbed jazz fusion. And during Pat Metheny's time as a member of Gary Burton's band, he recorded 3 albums. And for today's edition, I am going to be taking a look at all 3 Gary Burton albums that Pat Metheny played on. And as always, I am going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Now, the interesting thing about Pat Metheny on all 3 of these Gary Burton albums is at the time, he didn't quite sound like the man that we know now. Obviously, he was still a young musician, relatively new, finding his way and perfecting and refining his sound. And when you go through all of 3 of these albums, you can see how much Pat Metheny's guitar playing is evolving and that big things were on the horizon. And at the time that Pat Metheny joined Gary Burton's band, there was another guitarist, Mick Goodrick. And what we had here was a very unusual and unique concept in Gary Burton's band. We had Mick Goodrick, who was the more experienced and established of the two, as the lead guitarist playing 6-string guitar. And then on the other side, we had Pat Metheny, who was the new guy at the time, playing 12-string guitar. And after 2 albums, Mick Goodrick would leave the band and Pat Metheny would step into his shoes as the band's lead guitarist. And we start to see the real rise of Pat Metheny as he started to really perfect his sound. And this would lead to the foundations laid down for Pat Metheny forming his own band with keyboardist Lage, that we would all come to know as the legendary PMG, also known as the Pat Metheny Group. So we are going to start with the first album, and this one came out in 1974, and this one is called Ring. So Ring is the first appearance of Pat Metheny as a member of Gary Burton's band, and this is dubbed as the Gary Burton Quintet featuring Eberhard Weber. So even though it's a quintet, you could kind of call this the Gary Burton Sextet because Eberhard Weber plays such a dominant role in the music, and the names you've got here reads like a who's who of music royalty. We've got Gary Burton on vibraharp, Mick Goodrick on guitar, Pat Metheny on 12-string guitar, Steve Swallow on bass, Bob Moses on drums, and Eobard Weber on bass. So you've got two guitarists and two bass players, a drummer, and a vibraphonist. Just nuts. Just absolutely nuts. And the music on Ring is lots more leaning towards fusion, more rock driven, very heavily experimental, certain moments of avant garde, but it's all there. And even though Mick Goodrick is more up front as the lead guitarist, you can hear Pat Metheny in the background. You can hear rumblings of that sound that we would come to later know. And this is Pat Metheny year one, so to speak. So he's not the man yet, but you can listen closely to some of the classic hallmarks that we would all come to know Pat Metheny for. So we've got 6 tracks. Most of the compositions are written and composed by Mike Gibbs. We've got one contribution from Mick Goodrick, one contribution from Carla Bley, and one iconic track from Eobard Weber. So we've got Melvia, great opener. Unfinished Sympathy, brilliant track. Tunnel of Love is great. Intrude is great. Silent Spring, which is one of the all-time great Carla Bley compositions. And then we got The Colours of Chloe, one of the greatest Eobard Weber compositions ever. Excellent album, great playing from Gary Burton, of course, brilliant playing from Pat Metheny. Not quite the man there yet, but you can hear it's him. But it's just a fantastic album. Probably the most rock driven of the three, but still very enjoyable if you really want to hear the early beginnings of Pat Metheny. This is definitely one to start with. It's really good. And the standout tracks for me are The Colours of Chloe, Tunnel of Love, and Unfinished Sympathy. Beautiful album, and the first appearance of Pat Metheny as a member of Gary Burton's band. So there you have it. Gary Burton Quintet with Eobard Weber, Ring. Excellent album and a fine start for one of the all-time greats in Pat Metheny. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1976, and this one is called Dream So Real. So Dream So Real is still the Gary Burton Quintet, featuring Gary Burton on vibraphone, Mick Goodrick on guitar, Pat Metheny on 12-string guitar, Steve Swallow on bass, and Bob Moses on drums. Eobard Weber is not on this one, and Dream So Real is a lot more laid back and jazzier compared to Ring, which was a lot more experimental and a lot more rock driven. This album is a lot more laid back, but still very enjoyable. And Dream So Real features all Carla Bley compositions, and the Gary Burton band was no stranger to playing other musicians' compositions. Carla Bley was one of them, and it's a real nice treat to hear all 5 musicians tackle Carla Bley's compositions and really add their own mark to the music. And you've got Steve Swallow, who was married to Carla Bley. What a nice treat to hear him play his wife's music, and it just seems only fitting to have Steve Swallow playing Carla Bley's songs. And it's a real nice treat to hear Pat Metheny play Carla Bley stuff as well. And you really get to hear Pat Metheny starting to come to the forefront as a player. You can hear him a lot more on this one than you did on Ring. So you're starting to see the man that we know coming forward and his guitar playing evolving. Mick Goodrick is still the lead guitarist, but Pat Metheny is really starting to develop his own identity and his own unique voice on the 12-string guitar. And there's some brilliant playing from everyone. Bob Moses and Pat Metheny had already established their rapport together when Pat Metheny put out his first solo album, Bright Size Life, while still a member of Gary Burton's band, and Bob Moses was a huge part of that album. So you can really hear that rapport on Dream So Real, and everyone's just on top form. What more can you say, really? 5 of the absolute best musicians ever. Doesn't get any better than that. Playing one of the most iconic composers of all time. So we've got the title track, Dreams So Real, brilliant opener, Ictus/Syndrome, one of my all-time favourite songs ever. I've heard him play this live. Absolutely amazing treats. Jesus Maria is good. Vox Humana is good. Doctor is great, and intermission music. Great collection of songs from start to finish. It's Carla Bley. You know you're going to get the absolute best. She knows how to write music. She's just an incredible composer. And the standout tracks for me are Dream So Real, Ictus/Syndrome, Vox Humana, Doctor, and intermission music. But the whole album is just excellent and absolutely love it. I probably in some ways prefer Dream So Real over Ring. I'm not, sniffing at Ring. Ring is good, but I think Dream So Real might be just slightly better, in my opinion. I just think it's a little bit better than Ring, but that's just me. So there you have it. Dream So Real, excellent album and a great follow up from Ring. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1977. And for me, this could very well be not only my all time favourite of these three albums, but I consider this one to be the most important one for many reasons. And this one is called Passengers. So Mick Goodrick is no longer in the band now, so the Gary Burton Quintet is now the Gary Burton Quartet, and Eberhard Weber returns once again. So even though this is a quintet in the music, it's still the Gary Burton Quartet, but some excellent music. Bob Moses is also gone, and replacing him behind the drums is, of course, Danny Gottlieb. And Danny Gottlieb joining the Gary Burton band would mark an important shift and an important moment for Pat Metheny, because Danny Gottlieb would not only become one of Pat Metheny's main collaborators, but the two would also later on become founding members for the Pat Metheny group. And you can really hear the early rumblings of what we would come to know as the Pat Metheny group. And it's an excellent album. Pat Metheny steps into Mick Goodrick's shoes as the band's lead guitarist, and you could really start to hear the man we know coming to the forefront. And for me, out of all three of these albums, this is some of Pat Metheny's best guitar playing, and it's just excellent. Steve Swallow is on top form as always. Eberhard Weber on top form as always. Danny Gottlieb is just a machine on the drums, and Gary Burton sounds excellent as always on the vibraphones. So we've got Sea Journey by Chick Corea and three contributions by Pat Metheny. Nakada, which is more of a laid back ballad. The Whopper, which really captures the spirit and sound of what we would come to know as the Pat Metheny group. For me, probably the best track of the entire album, and probably the best Pat Metheny guitar solo on Passengers. We got a reworking of B and G, Midwestern Night's Dream from Bright Side's Life, and we got an Eberhard Weber composition, Yellow Fields, which is absolutely beautiful, and we got the haunting Claude and Betty by Steve Swallow. Great track to close out Passengers, but this whole album, from top to bottom, is just dynamite. It's pretty much the lost Pat Metheny group album before there was a Pat Metheny group album. It's just unbelievable. This would later on become what we would know with the Pat Metheny group, just without the vibraphones. But holy cow, this album scorches. Just tremendous stuff here, and every track on here is boom, boom, boom. Excellent track after excellent track. A true banger of an album. Just absolutely amazing. So this was definitely a warm up for what was to come in the future. But my goodness, what an album! And this would be Pat Metheny's last album as a member of Gary Burton's band, as he would leave with Danny Gottlieb, and they would start the Pat Metheny group. But Pat Metheny would continue to collaborate with Steve Swallow in a number of different situations. Eberhard Weber, of course, played on Pat Metheny's second album, Watercolors, and Pat Metheny and Gary Burton would reunite many years later and play together in a number of different situations and record many different projects. But officially, this would mark the final time and final album that Pat Metheny would record as a member of Gary Burton's band, as he would go on to become one of the biggest names on the planet. And the standout tracks for me are Nakada, The Whopper, Sea Journey, Yellow Fields, and BNG Midwestern Night Stream. But I love this album. All of it is brilliant, and probably Pat Metheny's finest hour as a member of Gary Burton's band. And it was quite clear that Pat Metheny was becoming far too big for Gary Burton's band, so it's inevitable that he was going to leave. So there you have it. Passengers, excellent album, probably my all-time favourite of these three. Love it, tremendous album. So which Gary Burton album featuring Pat Metheny do I think is the best one? Well, they're all good, they're all different, they all have their own unique personality, and they all showcase the evolution of Pat Metheny before he would go on to make a name for himself and start his own solo career. But if I had to choose one that I think really showcased Pat Metheny's guitar playing in Gary Burton's band, it's easily got to be Passengers, because for me, this was the real start of Pat Metheny becoming the man that we would know. And it has the early sounds of what we would come to know with the Pat Metheny group just shortly after this album. But I think he really came into his own, not only as a guitar player, but as a composer as well. And you could really start to see his star shining very brightly. And some of his best guitar playing as a member of Gary Burton's band was from Passengers. And it really helped set the tone for what was to come. And big things were definitely on the way. And the cool thing about this was Pat Metheny was only just getting started. So there you have it. Passengers, probably my all-time favourite of these three albums, and it's the one that I go back to the most. I think it's an excellent album, and it's ECM, excellent production, as are on all three of these albums. But I think the production on this album is probably just slightly better than the other two, and his guitar playing is really up front, and so many important key moments. The addition of Danny Gottlieb, who would go on to form the Pat Metheny group with Pat Metheny himself. So many important moments, you name it, but wow, unbelievable album. For me, probably my all-time favourite of the three. Love it. So you have it. Passengers, my favourite Gary Burton album featuring Pat Metheny. Excellent stuff. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Gary Burton album featuring Pat Metheny? Is it Ring, Dream So Real, or Passengers? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.